After leaving Maggie's ranch, Elliot Gaines found himself in Silver Creek, a small town that seemed frozen in time. The wooden buildings lining the main street looked weathered, and the air carried the faint scent of hay and horse manure. It wasn't the kind of place where dreams came true, but for Elliot, it was a chance to start over, even if it meant starting from scratch. He wandered into the livery stable, a large barn-like structure filled with the sound of horses snorting and the smell of fresh straw. The owner, an older man named Mr. Thompson, eyed Elliot warily when he asked for work. "You any good with horses?" Mr. Thompson asked, his tone gruff but not unkind. Elliot nodded. "I've worked with them since I was a boy," he replied simply. That was enough for Mr. Thompson, who hired him on the spot, though not without a hint of skepticism. Elliot threw himself into the job. From sunrise to sunset, he mucked out stalls, fed the animals, repaired harnesses, and helped travelers hitch their wagons. He didn't complain, even when the work was backbreaking or when some customers treated him poorly because of the color of his skin. There were days when people muttered under their breath or refused to look him in the eye. But there were also moments when someone would nod in appreciation or leave a coin as a tip, small gestures that reminded Elliot he wasn't invisible. Over time, the townsfolk began to notice something about him. No matter how hard things got, Elliot never lost his calm demeanor. He greeted everyone with a polite smile, offered help whenever he could, and carried himself with quiet dignity. Slowly, some of the hostility faded. People started calling him by name instead of ignoring him, and a few even struck up conversations while waiting for their horses to be saddled. One person who took particular notice was Clara Whitman, the local school teacher. Clara was known around town for her kindness and sharp mind. She spent her days teaching children of all ages in a tiny one-room schoolhouse, and her evenings reading books by candlelight. When she first saw Elliot at the stables, she was struck by how different he seemed from anyone else in Silver Creek. Most men in town were rough around the edges, quick to raise their voices or throw punches. But Elliot? He moved with purpose, spoke softly, and listened intently. Curious, Clara started visiting the stables more often. At first, she'd just stop by to check on her own mare, a gentle chestnut named Daisy. But soon, she found herself lingering longer, chatting with Elliot about everything from the weather to the latest news from Chicago. They discovered they both loved reading, and Clara lent him books she thought he might enjoy. One evening, after finishing a novel she'd recommended, Elliot told her, "Stories like this, they make me feel like maybe the world can be better than it is right now." Clara smiled warmly. "It already is, if you're willing to see it." Their friendship grew, and Clara became one of the few people Elliot truly trusted. She was the first person he opened up to about what had happened, with Maggie. Sitting on a bench outside the stables one crisp afternoon, Elliot shared the pain of being rejected because of his skin color. "I thought we'd connected through those letters," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I guess words don't mean much when someone sees only your face." Clara listened quietly, her heart aching for him. When he finished, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "What she did says more about her fears than about your worth," she said firmly. "Don't let her ignorance define you. You're stronger than that." Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Elliot allowed himself to believe that his life wasn't defined solely by rejection. Maybe there was still room for hope. While Elliot was finding his footing in town, Maggie Hensley was struggling to keep hers. Back at her ranch, the weight of her choices pressed down on her like a storm cloud. Without help, the farm was falling apart. Crops wilted in the fields, fences sagged dangerously low, and the cattle wandered too close to the riverbank, risking injury. Every task felt overwhelming, and every mistake piled onto her growing sense of failure. At night, lying alone in the creaky old farmhouse, Maggie replayed her encounter with Elliot over and over in her mind. She remembered the way he'd tipped his hat, the warmth in his eyes despite her cold reception. What had she expected? A stranger who matched some imaginary ideal she'd conjured in her head? Or someone real, flawed, and human? Someone who deserved a fair chance? The guilt gnawed at her during the day, too. Neighbors passing by would offer sympathetic nods or unsolicited advice. Should have given him a shot, one woman remarked bluntly. Another man joked, "Guess you're stuck doing all the work yourself now." Their comments stung, but none cut deeper than the ones Maggie whispered to herself. Why had she let prejudice win? Wasn't she supposed to know better? Winter approached quickly, bringing icy winds that rattled the windows and froze the ground solid. Maggie bundled up in layers of wool and tried to tackle the endless chores, but it was clear she couldn't do it alone. Her body ached from lifting heavy buckets and chopping firewood, and her spirit felt just as battered. Desperation clawed at her, urging her to act, but what could she possibly say to Elliot after the way she'd treated him? Determined to make amends, Maggie decided to visit Silver Creek. She hitched up her wagon and drove into town one chilly morning, her stomach churning with nerves. As she passed familiar landmarks, the general store, the saloon, the church, she wondered if Elliot would even want to see her. Would he tell her to leave? Worse yet, would he forgive her and move on, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone? When she finally reached the stables, her heart sank. Elliot wasn't there. Instead, she found Mr. Thompson, who informed her that Elliot had taken a new position overseeing construction crews for a wealthy businessman named Jonathan Pembroke. "He's done well for himself," Mr. Thompson added almost proudly. Maggie stood frozen, processing the information. Elliot had moved on, not just physically, but emotionally, and why shouldn't he have? He'd been nothing but honest and kind, while she judged him before even giving him a chance. Feeling smaller than ever, Maggie left the stables and headed toward the edge of town, where Jonathan Pembroke's crew was working on expanding the railroad. She didn't know what she would say or how Elliot would react, but one thing was certain: she owed him an apology. Whether he accepted it or not was up to him. As Maggie made her way closer to the construction site, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads, not just in her relationship with Elliot, but in her own journey toward becoming a better person. Little did she know this meeting would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows over the bustling construction site, where Jonathan Pembroke's crew was hard at work. The sound of hammers striking nails, saws slicing through wood, and men shouting instructions filled the air. It was a scene of organized chaos, with workers moving like ants building their hill. Among them stood Elliot Gaines, his tall frame easy to spot as he directed operations with calm authority. He wore sturdy boots caked in dirt, rolled-up sleeves revealing strong arms, and a hat pulled low against the glare of the sun. Jonathan Pembroke himself had arrived earlier that day, stepping out of his polished carriage with an air of confidence that commanded attention. A wealthy railroad magnate known for his sharp business acumen, Jonathan wasn't the type to micromanage projects. He trusted capable people to get the job done. But something about this particular project intrigued him. Maybe it was the rugged beauty of the landscape or the challenge of laying tracks across such unforgiving terrain. Whatever it was, he wanted to see progress firsthand. As Jonathan walked through the site, observing the workers and inspecting materials, his eyes landed on Elliot. There was something different about the way Elliot carried himself. His posture, straight. His movements deliberate, his voice firm but respectful when giving orders. Intrigued, Jonathan approached him. "You're overseeing this crew?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Elliot nodded, tipping his hat slightly. "Yes, sir. Doing my best to keep things running smoothly." Jonathan studied him for a moment before asking, "How did you end up here? You don't strike me as someone who's been doing this kind of work all his life." Elliot hesitated, unsure how much to share. But there was something about Jonathan's tone, curious but not pushy, that made him decide to open up. "I came west looking for a fresh start," he said simply. "Ended up working at the stables in town, then got hired on here. Seems like I found my place." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "A fresh start, huh? We all need one of those sometimes." Then, after a pause, he added, "Mind if I ask what brought you west in the first place?" Elliot considered the question. carefully. He didn't owe Jonathan anything, but the man seemed genuinely interested, not just in his skills, but in him as a person. So he told him about growing up in Chicago, facing prejudice every day because of the color of his skin, about joining the mail-order Groom program, hoping to find acceptance and partnership, and finally, about being rejected by Maggie Hensley. When she saw him face to face, Jonathan listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Elliot finished, the businessman let out a slow breath. "That's quite a story," he said quietly. "And it's a damn shame she couldn't see past her own biases. Sounds to me like she missed out on a good man." Elliot shrugged, trying to play it off lightly. "It's water under the bridge now. I'm focused on moving forward." "Well, you've certainly impressed me," Jonathan replied, clapping a hand on Elliot's shoulder. "Tell you what, I'd like you to stay on permanently once this project wraps up. There's plenty more work to be done, and I could use someone like you leading the charge." Elliot blinked in surprise. "Sir, are you sure? This is your operation. I wouldn't want to presume." "Nonsense," Jonathan interrupted with a wave of his hand. "I don't offer opportunities lightly, and I wouldn't waste my time if I didn't think you were the right man for the job. Consider it my way of investing in talent." For the first time in months, Elliot felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. This wasn't charity, it was recognition of his abilities, plain and simple. Grateful beyond words, he accepted the offer, knowing it would change his life in ways he hadn't imagined. Meanwhile, back in Silver Creek, Maggie Hensley wrestled with her emotions as she prepared to confront Elliot. She'd spent days rehearsing what she would say, but no amount of practice could ease the knot of guilt twisting in her stomach. What if he refused to listen? Worse yet, what if he forgave her too easily, leaving her to grapple with the weight of her mistakes alone? On the morning she planned to visit the construction site, Maggie dressed carefully, choosing practical clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Her heart raced as she hitched up her wagon and drove toward the outskirts of town. As she neared the site, the noise grew louder. The rhythmic pounding of hammers, the metallic scrape of tools, the occasional shout of a foreman. She parked her wagon a short distance away and stepped out, feeling small and out of place among the swarm of workers. Her eyes scanned the area until they landed on Elliot. Even from afar, he looked different somehow, more confident, more at ease. Gone was the hesitant man who'd stood on her porch months ago. In his place was someone who clearly belonged, someone others looked to for guidance. Maggie swallowed, hard steeling herself as she approached him. "Elliot," she called softly, her voice barely audible over the din. He turned, startled at first, then visibly tensed when he recognized her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Maggie broke the silence. "Can we talk, please?" Elliot studied her face, searching for some sign of sincerity. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right, let's step aside." They moved away from the commotion, finding a quiet spot near a stack of lumber. Maggie took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice shaky. "What I did, it was wrong. I judged you based on nothing more than the color of your skin, and I lost sight of everything else. The kindness in your letters, the effort you put into getting to know me. I threw it all away, because I was afraid of what other people might think." Elliot listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she paused, he asked, "Why now? Why come to me after all this time?" Maggie hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "Because I realized I can't keep living like this. My farm is falling apart, sure, but so is me. I've been carrying around this guilt, and it's eating me alive. I don't expect you to forgive me, Elliot. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am." Elliot exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck as he processed her words. Part of him wanted to lash out, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain he'd endured. But another part, the part shaped by Clara's wisdom and Jonathan's faith in him, knew that holding on to anger wouldn't change the past. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. But forgiveness, that's going to take time, both for you and for me." Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. If you'll let me." Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out across the construction site, watching the workers laboring under the bright sun. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control over his life, a reminder that he held the power to choose his path. Turning back to Maggie, he said, "We'll see. One step at a time." Back in town, news of Elliot's rise spread quickly. People who had once dismissed him now watched him with newfound respect, or at least curiosity. Clara Whitman was especially proud, often stopping by the stables to check in on him whenever she passed through. "Looks like you're making quite the name for yourself," she teased one afternoon, handing him a fresh loaf of bread she'd baked. Elliot chuckled, accepting the gift gratefully. "Just doing my part," he said modestly. "But yeah, things are starting to look up." Clara smiled knowingly. "Good things happen to good people, Elliot. You deserve every bit of it." As the weeks passed, Elliot threw himself into his work with renewed energy. Under his leadership, the construction crew completed phase after phase of the railway project ahead of schedule. Jonathan Pembroke couldn't have been happier, praising Elliot openly and encouraging others to follow his example. Slowly but surely, Elliot began to carve out a place for himself in Silver Creek, not as an outsider, but as someone integral to the community. Yet despite his success, Elliot couldn't shake the memory of Maggie's apology. Her words lingered in his mind, stirring a mix of emotions he wasn't ready to untangle. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily to him, especially after years of being judged unfairly. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for redemption, for both of them. Little did he know, Maggie was already taking steps to prove she meant what she'd said. Back at her ranch, she worked tirelessly to turn things around, pouring every ounce of effort into fixing what she'd neglected. She reached out to neighbors, offering help in exchange for advice. She attended church services, listening intently to sermons about compassion and second chances. Most importantly, she confronted her own prejudices head-on, determined to become someone worthy of trust. As winter gave way to spring, the seeds of change began to sprout, not just in Maggie's fields, but in her heart as well. And though neither she nor Elliot knew it yet, their paths were destined to cross again in ways neither could predict. As spring settled over Silver Creek, the town began to feel alive again. The snow melted away, revealing patches of green grass and wildflowers that dotted the hillsides. Birds chirped in the trees, and the air carried a fresh, earthy scent. For Elliot Gaines, this season brought more than just warmer weather. It marked a turning point in his life. Under Jonathan Pembroke's guidance, Elliot had flourished. He wasn't just overseeing construction crews anymore. He was leading them with a confidence that inspired everyone around him. His ability to solve problems quickly and keep morale high earned him respect from workers who once doubted him. Even those who had been skeptical about working under a black man now looked up to him, seeing not the color of his skin but the strength of his character. Jonathan himself couldn't stop praising Elliot. "You've got a gift for leadership," he said one afternoon as they stood surveying the nearly completed railway line. "Not everyone can bring people together like you do." Elliot smiled modestly, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just doing my job, sir. These men make it easy, they're hard workers." But Jonathan shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You listen to them. You treat them fairly. That's rare these days." Pausing for a moment, he added, "When this project wraps up, I want you to stay on permanently. We'll expand operations across the region, and I need someone like you at the helm." Elliot felt a surge of gratitude, but also a flicker of doubt. Staying meant committing fully to this new chapter of his life, leaving behind any lingering thoughts of what might have been with Maggie. Still, he knew he couldn't turn down such an opportunity. It was proof that he'd found his place in the world, even if it hadn't come the way he'd originally hoped. Back at her ranch, Maggie, Hensley worked tirelessly to rebuild not only her farm but also herself. Every morning she rose before dawn, determined to tackle the endless list of chores waiting for her. She repaired broken fences, cleared weeds choking her fields, and tended to her animals with care. Her hands were calloused, her body sore, but she didn't complain. This was penance for turning away a good man, for letting fear dictate her choices, for wasting so much time wallowing in regret. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had once whispered about her poor decision to reject Elliot now spoke admiringly of her determination. Some offered help, lending tools or sharing advice on crop rotation. Others invited her to gatherings, sensing her loneliness and wanting to include her. Slowly, Maggie began to reconnect with the community she'd isolated herself from. One day, while visiting the general store for supplies, Maggie bumped into Clara Whitman. They exchanged polite greetings, but Clara's sharp eyes caught the weariness in Maggie's face. "How are things going out there?" Clara asked gently. Maggie hesitated, unsure how much to share. Then, surprising even herself, she opened up. "It's hard, but I'm trying to fix what I broke. Not just the farm, but everything." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "That takes courage. Real change doesn't happen overnight. Just don't forget to be kind to yourself along the way." Maggie appreciated the advice, though she still struggled with self-forgiveness. Each night as she sat by the fire, she replayed her apology to Elliot in her mind. Had he believed her? Did he see her efforts as genuine? Or had she ruined any chance of redemption forever? Determined to prove herself, Maggie threw herself into improving not just her farm, but also her understanding of the world. She attended church regularly, listening intently to sermons about compassion and equality. She read books Clara lent her, stories about people overcoming prejudice and finding common ground. And she started speaking out against discriminatory practices in town meetings, using her voice to challenge the same biases she'd once clung to. Word of her transformation spread, reaching even the ears of those who had dismissed her before. One evening, as Maggie helped serve food at a community potluck, an older woman approached her. "You've changed," the woman said simply, "for the better." Maggie smiled faintly, touched by the acknowledgement. "I'm trying," she replied. "Trying to be someone worth trusting." Despite her progress, Maggie couldn't shake the longing to reconnect with Elliot. She missed the warmth of his letters, the promise of partnership they'd shared. More than anything, she wanted to show him that she was different now, that she could see beyond surface-level judgments and truly value the person he was. One sunny afternoon, she decided to visit the construction site again. This time, she came prepared, not with excuses, but with action. She loaded her wagon with baskets of fresh bread, pies, and jars of preserves she'd made herself. When she arrived, the workers greeted her warmly, grateful for the unexpected treat. Elliot, however, seemed surprised to see her. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to the food. "I baked it for your crew," Maggie explained, meeting his gaze steadily. "They've been working so hard, and I wanted to thank them and you for everything you've done for the town." Elliot studied her for a moment, searching for ulterior motives, but all he saw was sincerity. "Thank you," he said finally. "That was thoughtful of you." Maggie nodded, then hesitated. "Elliot, I know I hurt you, and I know apologies aren't enough, but I want you to know I'm working on being better, for myself, for others, and for you if you'll let me." Elliot didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out across the bustling site, watching as workers enjoyed the food she'd brought. After a long pause, he turned back to her. "You've changed," he said, quietly. "I can see that, but trust, it's fragile. If we're going to move forward, it has to be slow. No rushing it." Maggie swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand. I won't push you. Just thank you for hearing me out." Over the next few weeks, their interactions remained cautious but steady. Maggie continued visiting the site occasionally, always bringing something small, a basket of fruit, a jar of honey, a note of encouragement. At first, Elliot kept his distance, unsure if he could risk opening his heart again. But gradually, he began to soften, He noticed the little things, how she remembered details from their conversations, how she genuinely cared about the well-being of the workers, how she listened without interrupting. One evening, after most of the crew had left for the day, Maggie lingered near the edge of the site. Elliot joined her, leaning against a stack of lumber as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Why are you really here?" he asked suddenly, his tone softer than usual. Maggie sighed, looking down at her hands. "Because I messed up. Because I let fear control me when I should have trusted you. And because I don't want to lose the chance to make things right. Not just with you, but with myself." Elliot considered her words, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he said, "You're not the same person who rejected me months ago. I can see that. But rebuilding trust isn't easy. Are you ready for that?" "Yes," Maggie replied without hesitation. "I am." As the days turned into weeks, their relationship began to shift. Small talk gave way to deeper conversations. Tentative smiles became genuine laughter. Maggie shared stories of her struggles to revive the farm, while Elliot talked about his dreams for the future. They weren't back where they'd started. That connection forged through letters. But they were building something new, brick by brick. In town, people noticed the change. Where once there had been whispers of judgment, now there was quiet admiration. Maggie's willingness to confront her mistakes and grow inspired others to reflect on their own prejudices. Even Jonathan Pembroke remarked on it during one of his visits. "Looks like you two are figuring things out," he said with a knowing smile. "We're getting there," Elliot replied, glancing at Maggie. "Slowly, but surely." Maggie returned his smile, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her. For the first time in a long time, she believed they could find happiness, not despite their past, but because of it. Together, they were learning that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about growing stronger from them. And as spring gave way to summer, the seeds of forgiveness and love began to bloom, promising a future neither of them had dared to dream of before. The summer sun blazed over Silver Creek, casting golden light across the fields and turning the dusty roads into shimmering ribbons of heat. Life in the small frontier town moved at its usual steady pace, but for Elliot Gaines and Maggie Hensley, it felt like everything was shifting. Their cautious friendship had deepened into something more meaningful, a fragile yet hopeful bond built on mutual respect and shared vulnerability. Elliot still worked tirelessly on the railway project, his leadership earning praise from workers and supervisors alike. Under his guidance, the crew completed each phase of construction with precision and efficiency. Jonathan Pembroke often joked that Elliot was worth his weight in gold, though he never said it lightly. To him, Elliot wasn't just an employee. He was a partner, someone who understood the value of hard work and integrity. But as much as Elliot poured himself into the job, his thoughts frequently drifted to Maggie. Over the past few weeks, their interactions had grown less guarded, more natural. They'd started meeting regularly, sometimes at the construction site, other times near her ranch, as they worked to rebuild trust, one conversation at a time. Maggie no longer hesitated to ask for advice about managing her farm, and Elliot didn't shy away from offering it. He admired her determination, the way she tackled every challenge head-on despite the odds stacked against her. For her part, Maggie marveled at how patient and kind Elliot remained, even after everything she'd put him through. One sweltering afternoon, Maggie drove her wagon into town, loaded with fresh vegetables and jars of homemade preserves. She headed straight for the construction site, knowing the workers would appreciate the treat. As she unloaded the goods, she spotted Elliot talking to a group of men near the tracks. The sunlight caught his face, highlighting the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Yet there was a quiet strength in his posture, a calm confidence that made her heart swell with admiration. When the crowd dispersed, Maggie approached him, holding out a jar of strawberry jam. "For you," she said softly. "I figured you could use something sweet after all this hard work." Elliot accepted the gift with a grateful smile. "You didn't have to do this," he said, though his tone suggested he was touched by the gesture. "I wanted to," Maggie replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's the least I can do, considering." Elliot nodded, understanding what she meant without needing clarification. There was no need to dwell on the past. Not now, not when they were both working so hard to move forward. Instead, he changed the subject. "How's the farm coming along? Still wrestling with those stubborn chickens?" Maggie laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "They're finally laying eggs again. Took me long enough to figure out what they needed." She paused, then added, "Actually, I've been thinking about expanding the garden. Maybe planting some fruit trees next spring. What do you think?" Elliot tilted his head thoughtfully. "Sounds like a solid plan. Just make sure you space them properly or they'll choke each other out. See?" Maggie teased, nudging him playfully. "This is why I come to you for advice. You always know exactly what to say." Her words carried a double meaning, and Elliot caught it immediately. A flicker of emotion passed over his face. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. Whatever it was, it lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable. As the weeks went by, their connection continued to grow. Maggie began spending more time in town, volunteering at Clara Whitman's schoolhouse and attending community events she'd once avoided. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had once whispered about her rejection of Elliot now greeted her warmly, impressed by her efforts to change. Even Mr. Thompson, the gruff owner of the livery stable, tipped his hat whenever he saw her pass by. Clara, ever observant, noticed the shift in Maggie's demeanor. One evening, as they sat together on Clara's porch sipping lemonade, she remarked, "You seem lighter these days, happier." Maggie smiled, gazing out at the horizon where the sky glowed orange and pink. "I think I am," she admitted. "It's not easy, letting go of old habits and fears, but every day feels like progress." Clara nodded approvingly. "That's all any of us can hope for. Progress. And speaking of which," she raised an eyebrow knowingly. "How are things with Elliot?" Maggie hesitated, unsure how much to share. Then, deciding honesty was best, she said, "Better. We're taking it slow, but I think we're getting somewhere. He's still cautious, and I don't blame him, but he's starting to open up again." "That's wonderful," Clara said sincerely. "He deserves happiness, and so do you." Maggie felt a lump rise in her throat. "I just hope I can prove myself worthy of his trust. I don't want to mess this up." "You won't," Clara assured her. "Not if you keep being honest, with him and with yourself." Back at the construction site, Elliot found himself reflecting on his own journey. When he'd first arrived in Silver Creek, broken and rejected, he doubted whether he'd ever find his place. Now, standing among men who respected him and seeing the tangible results of his labor, he realized how far he'd come. And yet, there was still one piece missing: closure with Maggie. Late one evening, after most of the crew had gone home, Elliot wandered toward the edge of the property where Maggie often parked her wagon. Sure enough, she was there, sitting cross-legged on a blanket with a sketchpad in hand. She looked up as he approached, surprise flickering across her face. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I wanted to check on you," Elliot replied, settling down beside her. "Make sure you weren't trying to lift anything too heavy." Maggie chuckled. "I'm tougher than I look, you know." "Oh, I know," Elliot said with a grin. "But that doesn't mean I can't worry." His words hung in the air, simple, yet profound. Maggie set aside her sketchpad and turned to face him fully. "Elliot, I know I've said this before, but I really am sorry. For everything. For letting my fears get in the way. For pushing you away when I should have welcomed you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I have to." Elliot studied her face, searching for any trace of hesitation. All he saw was sincerity. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "What matters is that you're trying, that you're willing to grow." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Does that mean you forgive me?" Elliot exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the horizon. Forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight, it's a process for both of us. But yes, I think I'm ready to let go of the anger, to give us another chance. Relief washed over Maggie, followed by a wave of gratitude so strong, it nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me, in us." Elliot reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers. "We've both been hurt, but maybe that pain can teach us how to love better this time." Their reconciliation wasn't perfect. It couldn't erase the scars of the past, but it was real. Over the following weeks, they grew closer, sharing meals under starlit skies and walking side by side through fields of wildflowers. Maggie introduced Elliot to the rhythms of farm life, teaching him how to milk cows and shear sheep. In return, Elliot showed her the intricacies of carpentry, helping her repair the creaky barn doors and build a sturdy chicken coop. In town, their budding relationship became a topic of quiet celebration. People admired the way they supported each other, proving that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions. Clara often remarked on how lucky they were to have found their way back to each other, while Jonathan Pembroke simply smiled knowingly whenever Elliot mentioned Maggie's name. By late summer, the railway project neared completion. Jonathan called Elliot into his office one afternoon, a proud gleam in his eye. "You've done incredible work here," he said. "And I meant what I said earlier. I want you to stay on permanently. We'll expand operations across the region, and I need someone like you leading the charge." Elliot felt a surge of pride, but also conflict. Staying meant committing fully to this new chapter of his life, leaving behind any lingering doubts about his future with Maggie. Yet as he thought about the woman waiting for him back at the farm, he realized he no longer felt torn. His answer came easily. "Thank you, sir. I'd be honored to continue working with you. But if it's all right, I'd like to split my time between the farm and the railway. There's still so much I want to build with my hands and with my heart." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "A man after my own heart. Balance is key. Just don't forget to take care of yourself along the way." "I won't," Elliot promised. "Not anymore." As autumn approached, painting the landscape in shades of amber and crimson, Elliot and Maggie stood together on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the sunset. The air smelled of hay and wood smoke, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence between them. "We've come a long way," Maggie said softly, leaning against him. "We have," Elliot agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "But the road ahead is just beginning." Maggie smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Together, they had faced rejection, guilt, and fear, and emerged stronger for it. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in a world that often tried to divide them, that was enough. By the time autumn painted Silver Creek in hues of gold and crimson, Elliot Gaines and Maggie Hensley had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Their journey from rejection to reconciliation wasn't without its challenges, but every step they took together brought them closer, not just as partners but as people who understood each other's struggles and triumphs. Elliot divided his time between overseeing the railway expansion and helping Maggie with the farm. It wasn't always easy juggling both responsibilities, but he found joy in the balance. Mornings were spent at the construction site, where workers now looked up to him not just as a supervisor, but as someone who inspired them to be better versions of themselves. Afternoons, however, belonged to Maggie and the land she loved so fiercely. Together they repaired fences, harvested crops, and planned for the future. The farm slowly transformed under their care, becoming a place of promise rather than despair. Maggie marveled at how much her life had changed since Elliot returned to it. She no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness or the overwhelming burden of running the ranch alone. With Elliot by her side, tasks that once seemed impossible became manageable, even enjoyable. They laughed often, finding humor in the little things. A stubborn goat refusing to budge, a patch of tomatoes growing wild despite neglect, or the way the chickens scattered whenever Elliot tried to approach them. But beyond the laughter and shared chores, there was a deeper connection forming between them. Maggie noticed how Elliot listened intently when she spoke, never interrupting or dismissing her thoughts. He valued her opinions, whether they were about crop rotation or what color to paint the barn door. In return, Maggie made an effort to understand his world, the complexities of managing a crew, the pressure of meeting deadlines, the quiet pride he took in seeing the railway stretch farther across the landscape. One crisp afternoon, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Maggie turned to Elliot with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't let my fears get in the way back then?" Elliot considered the question, his gaze fixed on the fiery streaks of orange and pink painting the sky. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I wonder what our lives would look like if we'd started this journey sooner. But then I remind myself it wouldn't be the same. We wouldn't be the same." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked, tilting her head curiously. Elliot smiled faintly, his voice soft but steady. "We've both grown so much since then. You've faced your fears, your biases, and worked hard to change, and me, I've learned to trust again, even after being hurt. If we hadn't gone through all of that, maybe we wouldn't appreciate what we have now." Maggie nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "You're right. This us. It feels stronger because we fought for it." "That's exactly it," Elliot said, reaching over to take her hand. "Love isn't just about the good times. It's about sticking together through the tough ones, too." As winter approached, bringing frosty mornings and shorter days, Elliot and Maggie prepared the farm for the colder months ahead. They stacked firewood near the house, insulated the barn, and stored away the last of the season's harvest. Despite the chill in the air, warmth radiated from within the farmhouse. For the first time in years, Maggie felt truly content. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. They still had plenty of work to do, both on the farm and in their relationship. But she also knew they were ready to face whatever came their way. In town, news of their partnership spread quickly. Neighbors who had once whispered about Maggie's poor decision to reject Elliot now spoke admiringly of how far she'd come. Her willingness to confront her mistakes and grow inspired others to reflect on their own prejudices. Even those who had doubted Elliot's ability to lead now praised him openly, recognizing the strength and integrity he brought to every task. Clara Whitman, ever the observant friend, visited the farm one snowy afternoon, carrying a basket of freshly baked cookies. "Thought you two could use something sweet to warm up," she said with a grin, brushing snowflakes from her coat. "Perfect timing," Maggie replied, ushering her inside. "The fire's already going, and we were just talking about how lucky we are to have such good friends." Clara chuckled, settling into a chair by the hearth. "Luck has nothing to do with it. You've earned every bit of happiness coming your way." Elliot joined them, handing Clara a mug of hot tea. "Thanks for stopping by," he said warmly. "It means a lot." They spent the afternoon reminiscing about everything that had happened. Over the past year, the highs and lows, the lessons learned, the moments that had shaped them into who they were today. Clara listened intently, occasionally chiming in with stories of her own. By the time she left, the room felt lighter, filled with laughter and gratitude. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered at the church for a holiday celebration. Candles flickered softly, casting a golden glow over the wooden pews while carolers sang hymns that echoed through the rafters. Elliot and Maggie sat side by side, holding hands beneath the blanket draped over their laps. As the pastor delivered his sermon about forgiveness and renewal, Maggie leaned closer to Elliot. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she whispered, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "How could I forget?" Elliot replied, his tone teasing. "You practically ran me off your property." Maggie laughed softly, shaking her head. "Well, I'm glad you didn't give up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." Elliot squeezed her hand gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance, including you." After the service ended, the congregation spilled out into the snowy night, sharing hugs and well wishes. Jonathan Pembroke sought out Elliot and Maggie, wishing them a happy holiday. "Looks like you two are thriving," he remarked with a knowing smile. "We're getting there," Elliot said modestly. Jonathan nodded approvingly. That's all anyone can ask for. Keep doing what you're doing. You're making this town proud. As fireworks lit up the sky to mark the occasion, Elliot pulled Maggie close, wrapping his arms around her against the cold. Happy Christmas, he murmured, his breath visible in the frosty air. Happy Christmas, she echoed, resting her head on his shoulder. And here's to many more. Years passed and life in Silver Creek continued to evolve. The railway brought new opportunities, drawing settlers and businesses to the area. Elliot remained a key figure in its success, earning respect not just for his skills but for his unwavering commitment to fairness and equality. Maggie, meanwhile, transformed her struggling farm into a thriving enterprise, known for its bountiful harvests and welcoming atmosphere. Their love story became a legend, of sorts, a tale of redemption, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. People often remarked on how different they were from when they'd first met, yet how perfectly suited they were for each other now. Through hard work and determination, they had built not just a life together, but a legacy. One evening, as they stood side by side watching the sunset over their land, Elliot reflected on how far they'd come. You know, he said softly, sometimes I think losing everything is what taught me what really matters. Maggie glanced at him, her eyes shining with affection. What matters? People, Elliot replied simply. The ones who see you for who you are, not what they expect you to be. And the ones brave enough to admit when they're wrong, and willing to change. Maggie smiled, leaning into him. Well, I'm glad I got a second chance to be one of those people. So am I, Elliot said, kissing the top of her head. So am I. And as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, they stood together, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment, and excited for whatever lay ahead.